Welcome to Wandering Jews at J Squared Adventures. Travel far enough and you meet yourself.
We're your hosts. I'm Scott.
I'm Sorrel.
We're standing on a dusty hill not far from Rehovot. Surrounded by the scenic landscape, birdsong is clearly heard. Quiet and unassuming. There's little to suggest that this place was once the center of an extraordinary mission. But step inside what used to be the Kibbutz laundry, and immediately we're drawn into a different reality. A tour educator casually slides aside a heavy washing machine, revealing a staircase leading to the world below. As you descend into the cool, dimly lit space, you find yourself inside a hidden factory. A factory that helped make the founding of the State of Israel possible.
This is the Ayalon Institute, a clandestine bullet factory that operated during the final years of the British Mandate, between 1945 and 1948, as the Yishuv prepared for a fight that would determine its survival. Young men and women, some barely out of their teens, worked in this factory in total secrecy. Over 3 years, this underground facility produced over 2 million bullets for the Haganah, the underground defense force of the Jewish community in Palestine.
Sorrel, I think you'd agree with me if I say that this is not just a story about bullets. It's a story about resilience, about ingenuity, about sacrifice. It's about the courage of young pioneers who risked it all for a cause greater than themselves. And it's about the sheer determination of the Jewish people to build a state, even when the odds were stacked against us.
Totally. But let's step back a minute, because to understand the significance of the Ayalon Institute, aka Bullet Factory, we have to go back to the late 1930s and 40s, right? We talked about the Yishuv, a time when the Jewish community in Palestine was growing, but also struggling under British rule. After the Balfour Declaration of 1917, which supported the establishment of a Jewish homeland, the British began to impose increasingly restrictive policies on Jewish immigration and land acquisition in response to Arab opposition. So things were tense, to put it quite mildly.
And really, this was a turning point in British foreign policy vis-a-vis the Zionist movement and the Palestine Eretz Yisrael Mandate. 1939, the British White Paper, a Foreign Office document outlining British policy in the Mandate. Jewish refugees were turned away. They were fleeing Nazi-occupied Europe. Immigration quotas were strictly enforced, and those who tried to enter illegally were often interned or simply returned to Europe. At the same time, the British were cracking down on Jewish defense and paramilitary organizations like the Haganah and others, confiscating weapons and arresting members.
But that didn't stop the Yishuv. Despite these challenges, the Jewish community was determined to defend itself and prepare for what seemed to be the inevitable confrontation with both the British and the Arab forces, who were stiffly opposed to the establishment of a Jewish state. But there was one glaring problem in all of this: a lack of weapons and ammunition.
If we go back even to the beginning of the Mandate, the Haganah, the Jewish self-defense in the pre-state period, in the period of the Yishuv, the Haganah was warranted by the British. The British recognized the right of the Jewish community of the land of Israel, of Palestine, to defend itself. And really, the Haganah was the backbone of the Yishuv's defense strategy. But again, obviously, without sufficient arms, the ability of the Haganah to protect Jewish settlements, towns and cities, especially in outlying areas, and prepare for what might be a larger war, the ability was severely limited. Guns were smuggled in from Europe. They were purchased clandestinely from all kinds of people and places, and even stolen from British supplies. But bullets were in critical short supply.
And this is where actually the challenge became almost insurmountable, because it wasn't only illegal to manufacture bullets in Palestine, but it was also an incredibly dangerous proposition. The British maintained such strict control over arms production, and any discovery of a clandestine factory would have led to arrests. It could have led to executions, and certainly the dismantling of the entire operation.
And so the leadership of the Haganah obviously headed by David Ben-Gurion, who would later become Israel's first prime minister, defense minister, and the figure who proclaimed the new state of Israel in May of 1948. The leadership of the Haganah of the Yishuv knew they had no choice. If the Yishuv was going to survive, it needed bullets, and lots of them. And so in 1945, the decision was made to build a secret factory capable of producing ammunition.
And the site chosen for this factory was near Rehovot, my hometown, on land that appeared to be nothing more than an ordinary kibbutz. On the surface, it had all the hallmarks of communal life: fields, a bakery, a laundry facility. But below ground, a team of young pioneers, many of them from the Haganah, worked tirelessly to create an underground bullet factory.
The factory was built very carefully using the top technology, and they had to be extremely creative. Masking the noises of the machinery, for example, the laundry and the bakery above ground operated simultaneously, their sounds blending together in order to mask what was going on down below. The staircase leading to the underground facility was hidden beneath a heavy washing machine, which could be moved aside only with special equipment. The factory was equipped with machinery smuggled in from Poland, dismantled, and reassembled in secret, once again, underground.
So if you think about what they had to do to maintain this level of secrecy over the 3 years, the workers rarely left the kibbutz. They stayed on site. And even in terms of what they told and communicated to their families and friends, as far as they were concerned, they were going out for their day, regular kibbutz work. This was a level of secrecy that basically survival, your life depended on it. And even the British soldiers who occasionally would come and visit the kibbutz to do their laundry, they had no idea.
Definitely. And consider, I think for most of us, I know myself pretty well, and I'm not the best always at keeping secrets. And, it's one thing when it's a small secret about, who ate the last ice cream in the freezer. This is literally a secret that if it gets out, could not only endanger the workers in the factory, the kibbutz itself, but really the entire yeshuv's efforts to procure a reasonable amount of ammunition in case of upcoming military needs.
I can't even imagine what must have been like the human cost, the tension that they must have endured on a daily basis.
Definitely. And I think that, life fairly at the Ayalon Institute, as it was called, was quite grueling. The underground factory, it was hot. It was poorly ventilated.
No air conditioning.
No air conditioning, of course. Temperatures often reaching unbearable levels. Constant noise. People couldn't hear each other, let alone think. And the workers had to develop hand signals just to coordinate their efforts to someone who was immediately across the room from them.
I could imagine their hearing being affected after a while amongst one of the many tolls. So when we're talking about these workers again, remember, they were in their late teens, early 20s, practically kids, and they bore this weight, enormous weight and enormous responsibility because ultimately what was on the line, these bullets that they were producing would be used to defend not only their families, not only their homes, but the future states of Israel.
And again, the psychological toll, secrecy meant they couldn't share their experiences with anyone outside the factory, not even their closest friends or families, boyfriends, girlfriends. People lived double lives, carrying the burden of secret that could never be revealed. You see some of these spy thrillers, on Netflix, etc., The Jackal or others, superhero movies with, hidden identities, and they always hint at this price of the hidden identity. But, this is real life. It's not a comic book. It's not a Netflix film. And again, for these young people in their late teens, early 20s, it must have been incredibly hard to keep that secret in.
Mind-blowing. So let's look at when the War of Independence broke out in 1948. The bullets produced at the Ayalon Institute by these young workers, it took on a new practical urgency. Over the course of its operation, we said that the factory had produced over 2 million 9mm bullets, which were used in Sten guns by Haganah fighters. And now we're on the ground, we're in the midst of the war, and they had paved the way with their production of bullets. They played such a critical role that people don't realize in battles across the country, from the defense of Jerusalem to the fight for the Negev.
It's really no exaggeration to say that the work of the Ayalon Institute helped secure the survival of the fledgling state. Without the bullets produced in this underground factory, the Haganah would have been vastly unprepared for the war that followed UN partition plan in late November of 1947.
Today, the Ayalon Institute stands as a museum, preserving this extraordinary story. Visitors can descend into the underground factory. J-Squared certainly like to take our travelers there to really witness this story come to life, to see the original machinery in front of you, to hear the stories of these young pioneers who worked there. You're standing in that small space, but you're surrounded by the echoes of history. You cannot help but feel a sense of awe.
I think that's really true. And, I've seen it with groups many times when we visit the Ayalon Institute. Like a lot of places, you can say, oh, well, it's history and I wasn't alive and it's a long time ago. But there is something about the story, and it could be the place as a proto-example of the startup nation. It could be about young people giving so much of themselves. As Nathan Alterman said, they are the silver platter on which the state of the Jews was brought into reality.
It could also be the location, the fact that it's in Rehovot,
For sure. So if I'm standing at a site like the Ayalon Institute with our groups, that issue of the Haganah generation or the Palmach generation, and the Palmach were the strike forces, the special units, again, all volunteers, mainly from the kibbutzim and the moshavim all over the country. And one of those young people, Samech Izhar, who fought during the Independence War, a lot of his writing talks about this period. His magnum opus, Days of Ziklag, is this giant Russian-sized novel, 2 volumes, talking about life at a small outpost in the Negev.
Days of Ziklag.
Days of Ziklag. And he also wrote about the Palestinian issue and about the moral price that a young country was paying to bring itself into creation. And at a certain point before he passed away a number of years ago, unfortunately, Zichrono Livracha, he also talked about that special generation. And I think that for people who are visiting the site, that image of these young people, the factory, the work they did, the hardship they endured, and why they did it, is such an important piece. And so a lot of times I like to bring some of this particular article that originally appeared in the Jerusalem Post in order to flesh out the voice of that generation and the issues that they were facing. So I'll just read a couple of lines to flesh this out. The magic word was state, a state, and everything would be different from now on. The fears of the Second World War would evaporate. The hardships of centuries of exile would ease up. A state, and everything that had failed or been missed would come right in just a minute. The horrors suffered so recently by European Jews, as well as everything that was too hard to endure in the tiny Jewish community here in the land of Israel, poverty, helplessness, the endless Arab attacks, the never-ending British harassment, the begging, the failures wherever we turned, everything hanging from a thread for too long now. Now a state would be founded, and everything would become solid, terra firma, and the Jews would have a state. Of course, it's easy to scoff at that faith now, to question the dream. Now that a state is created, the idea that it can solve everything, it's easy to look back and think, wow, we were a bit blind, a bit naive, or perhaps we were just too dejected to understand how gullible and maybe even a little bit pathetic we all were. We forgot about reality and the boundaries of imagination. We sometimes ignored the hard facts and the realities of our neighbors and of the Middle East. But this was a generation that did not philosophize about a state. They were a generation that knew that it all depended on their hands. Now, and moving forward, they were the ones that would build and create, and that their sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters would have to keep the dream alive.
Wow, that's really powerful, Scott.
And I think it's an incredible piece. It was written in 1998. It was published in Yediot Achronot and then later in translation in the Jerusalem Post. but it strikes such a chord in terms of both telling the story of his generation and their hope, and also the trust that they handed over to all of us when we take a look at where we're at and the things that must be taken on to make sure that this place continues to flourish in the way that they dreamed.
And also, like, as you were talking about the sacrifices that we made, and, we had all the memories of, bloodsheds and all the persecution that we've endured, you can actually visualize. I think it's really great that you could see yourself bringing that text in the Ayalon Institute, because you could actually visualize, as you're saying that, the sacrifice of these workers underground, right? It wasn't like they were out there, like on the battleground. Like, they were underground, and they were part of that struggle that Samach described so aptly.
For sure.
So, when we reflect on this story, it's interesting to consider, what does it mean to go underground? Not just physically, but metaphorically. The workers of the Ayalon Institute, they certainly lived in the shadows. They sacrificed their comfort, their safety, for a cause bigger than themselves, which I think, like in the history of the state of Israel, to connect yourself to something bigger than you are, something that to different degrees and different generations we can tap into. But this story is part of a larger tradition of Jewish resilience, a modern chapter in the very long history of a people who faced adversity with courage and creativity.
And hopefully when we're visiting these places, and it's almost irrelevant, is it specifically the Ayalon Institute or almost anywhere else, wherever we're standing in places where other people walked before us, where other people lived before us, where other people made decisions, and they may have succeeded and they may have failed before us. And so that idea, that metaphor that you suggested is really true. There may be much more beneath the surface than meets the eye. And I think part of the challenge, life in general, and definitely as a traveler, is trying to hopefully get below the surface a little bit to feel like, hey, I've spoken with the past. I've been able to communicate with their struggles and their challenges and their victories and their failures, and ask that question, what do I take away from that? And now, something for the road. A tip, a recommendation to help you make every journey your own.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gilad Peled. I am a tour educator at J Squared Adventures, and I am very, very happy to join you today. I would like to talk about processing your experience in Israel. Now, when people visit Israel, they're often overwhelmed, in the best way, by how intense the experience is. You're constantly on the move, hearing powerful stories, meeting all kinds of people, and walking through places filled with deep meaning. It's exciting, yes, but also emotional, thought-provoking, and at times even a little disorientating. And because it's so full on, it can be really hard to explain what the experience was like once you're back home. There's just so much to take in, and a lot of it is deeply personal. So to help make your journey more meaningful and easier to share when you return, I want to offer 3 simple suggestions. First, take a little time each day to write down what you're experiencing. Nothing fancy, just notes in your phone, a journal entry, or even a voice memo. What did you do today? What moved you? What surprised you? What are you still sitting with or wrestling through? Capturing those thoughts in the moment will help you process it all later, and you'll be so glad you did when you try to explain it to others down the line. Second, try to create space for group reflection during the trip. This is something tour leaders often plan, but it's worth keeping in mind for everyone. When the schedule is packed, it's easy to jump from one amazing site to the next without stopping to reflect. But pausing as a group, even for just a few minutes, to talk about what you're seeing and feeling can make a huge difference. It turns a bunch of individual moments into a shared, deeper experience. The educational philosopher John Dewey once said that an experience isn't just what we do, it's also about what happens to us as a result. And he warned that without taking time to reflect, even powerful moments can become scattered or lost. He put it this way: mere activity does not constitute experience. It is dispersive, centrifugal, and dissipating. Change is meaningless transition unless it is consciously connected with the return wave of consequences which flow from it. So, in simple terms, without reflection, even the most meaningful experiences might not leave a lasting mark. But without reflection, we catch that return wave. We connect the dots, we grow, and we understand more of what the experience really meant. When you return home, people will likely ask, so how was your trip to Israel? And your answer might be something like, it was great. It was amazing, wow, or wonderful. But will you be able to go beyond those words? Will you be able to articulate the real value the trip held for you? The ways it moved you, challenged you, or even changed you? Can you explain what exactly made it so amazing? That's why moments of reflection, both personal and shared, are so important. They help you give language to the depth of your experience, making it something you don't just remember, but truly carry with you and share with others in a meaningful way. Now, here's my third and final suggestion. When you get home, choose someone close to you, someone who really cares, and take the time to tell them about your trip in detail. Not just it was amazing, but why it was amazing. Walk with them through the journey. Tell them about the people you met, the places that left a mark, and the questions that are still sitting with you. Telling your story is one of the most powerful ways to keep the experience alive. And the more you share it, the more clearly you'll understand it yourself. It turns a good trip into something that stays with you and something that continues to shape who you are. This is it. This is my advice. I hope to see you next time in Israel or around the Jewish world. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. Dive deeper into the world of travel on our J Squared Adventures website. That's j2adventures.com. And stay in the loop with our latest adventures on all our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all under J2 Adventures. And if you enjoyed hanging out with us, don't forget to leave us a comment, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, travel safely and keep wondering. I'm Sorrel.
I'm Scott.
See you soon with the Wandering Jews.